I would just want to ask about the probiotics on the human side, because Emma and I had a really focused conversation on probiotics, and she's really enlightened me on the fact that really the gut for humans gets colonized between the ages of zero to three, like really early on in life. And she's like, the thought that a probiotic can have any sort of meaningful impact on colonization of the gut thereafter, she's like, there's really no strong evidence to suggest that it would. She's like, there might be some probiotics out there that have shown some effectiveness, but really, eat a spoonful of yogurt, you're probably not going to get some sort of meaningful colonization. You study probiotics as well. I mean, is there any sort of, do you want to build on that at all, or would you generally agree with that? Or
yeah, I would agree that probiotics don't always colonize, but they don't need to colonize to have a benefit. Is what I would say.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So I've been a part of the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics, and so it's really interesting because the general public's perception of probiotics is that that you take them and they help replenish your good bacteria, but that's not that's not how they always function. They can help by a lot of ways. Even though they don't colonize, they might help get rid of pathogenic bacteria that are colonizing. Right? Essentially, there's a constant battle between good microbes and bad microbes in your gut.
Yeah.
And adding probiotics or good microbes can help get rid of or deplete those bad microbes. They may not necessarily impact your good microbes, and they may not stick around themselves, but they get rid of the bad microbes. And they can also help, for example, through the things that these good microbes are making, or these probiotic microbes are making, they can help restore your gut lining. So I'm sure, in the public eye, leaky gut's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Leaky gut is simply intestinal permeability. So your cells should be, tightly linked like this. Nothing should be getting through, and many stressors in life can cause kind of gaps to get through, and the probiotics can help tighten that back up. So even though they don't colonize, they can help your gut integrity and improve health in that way. Yeah. So essentially, I feel like the main message I would end there with is that probiotics don't need to colonize to have a benefit. Some probiotics can colonize and exert a benefit, but they all work a little differently, and not one probiotic fits, all situations. And also, a probiotic that is good for one person or that has a benefit in one person may not benefit another person. You got host genetics, and then you have microbiome specifics. People have different microbiome compositions.
Yeah.
So all of these contextual dependencies on whether or not a probiotic may be beneficial.
Okay, Brendan, you're right now just like blowing my mind, because I walked away from, and I think that's a really good distinction. Like, I walked away from that conversation with Emma, like, okay, if it's not going to colonize your gut, and she didn't say this, so this is really my assumption and interpretation, but that if it's not going to colonize the gut, really there's probably no benefit. But like, again, you hear so many people saying like, I took that probiotic and made me feel good. And Emma did acknowledge like there can be some temporary benefits, but we really didn't get into like how that would actually, like what those what those benefits would add. So what I'm hearing from you is that probiotics in some ways, potentially could help with leaky gut, with helping some of that binding that needs to happen with that permeability that's there in the gut walls. You also talked a little bit about your research with mercury. So like, is there a potential that probiotics can sort of help almost like detoxify or remove some of these kind of chemicals or whatever it might be? Or
yeah, so the studies to date, I don't believe that the probiotics could pull the mercury out of you if you have, or the heavy metals out of you, like a chelation agent would, but they could help in a prophylactic manner by preventing uptake in the first place. So the studies that have been done in like Tanzania, and they've been smaller pilot studies looking at how consumption of, for example, probiotics in yogurt could reduce mercury absorption from the fish there that are really high in mercury. Well, fish everywhere are high in mercury, but in certain parts of Africa, they're particularly high, and there's also pesticide leakage into the waterways and things like that.
So people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, they're either going to think maybe, okay, what probiotics should I even focus on, or now should I like, what's your sort of takeaway for folks then, like in terms of how they incorporate probiotics? Is it more through like, what about fermented foods? Like, or is it actually taking a probiotic supplement, or like, I don't know. How do you help someone navigate this question? Because I'm sure people ask you about this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first thing I always try to say is that yogurt isn't probiotic, and kombucha is not probiotic, kefir is not probiotic. None of these things are actually probiotic. People often will call those fermented foods probiotics, and they're not. They're fermented foods, and the distinction is should be clear. And I think we should make it more common in you know public eye and public language discussing it, because fermented foods can have a benefit. We've been fermenting foods for thousands of years. We know that humans do that. It's been a great way to preserve a food, and there's also health benefits associated with it. But a microbe to be a probiotic has to be distinctively characterized at the strain level. And it has to have, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical studies done on it. It has to have multiple, right? And it has to show a distinct benefit for treating a distinct disease or a distinct disorder. Probiotics aren't this like one-size-fits-all magic potion. And I feel like that's when you start thinking of it that way, or you start communicating it that way, it becomes less clear of how they are really beneficial. For just a really simple way to remember it is, if you look at the label and you see something say, let's say Lactobacillus acidophilus, that's the genus and species name. After it, you should see a strain name. That strain name shouldn't be italicized. It should just be like, sometimes it's alphanumerical code A123. That's the most important part to look at when considering probiotics, is that strain name. So there's the most well-studied strain or probiotic strain is Lactobacillus bacillus rhamnosus, GG. And you'll also see it shortened as just LGG. That study that probiotic has been studied the most out of all probiotics, and it has tons of clinical evidence for supporting essentially gut health and IBS symptoms, and can be immunostimulatory in certain circumstances and have certain health benefits. So if you remember the mouthful of name I just said, Lactobacillus bacillus rhamnosus, GG, and then you have another strain, maybe it's AA. GG and AA do not necessarily deliver the same benefits. So often fermented foods can have a variety of strains, and depending on where you make those fermented foods depending on the geographic location, there can be different strains in that area, right? And they're not all going to have the same benefit. So you can't expect them to reproducibly deliver a health benefit when they're not the same strain. And the same thing in the honeybee world is that, or you're really in the animal world in general, probiotics for livestock, they haven't been as regulated as the human side of things. You go into the supermarket now, and our regulations are pretty good. If you in Canada at least, and in many places in Europe, if you go into the yogurt section and you see something say probiotic, you can almost always guarantee that it will say the strain name that has been studied in a clinical study to support whatever it's saying it's a probiotic for. Advertising as a probiotic and you're not defining at the strain level isn't really allowed or feasible in the human side of things anymore.